Hey everybody, welcome to Methods Week 13. We are going to talk about basic diagramming using Photoshop and Rhino today. Let's get started. Okay, so for your last project, we're going to be creating a series of diagrams using your solar shade. So let's talk about the basic way to get started on this. And we have some steps in the assignment, but what I want to do is kind of show you where I would get started on these. So you're going to be choosing an isometric view for your diagrams. So you're going to want to choose either a southeast or a southwest. So you can see the view I've chosen here in Rhino. And then what you want to do is you actually want to make a series of copies of your diagrams, because what your diagrams are going to do is they're going to have multiple elements of your project either in different positions, or they're going to be absent from the drawing or something like that. And that's going to allow you to build up your diagram and create these series of images, right? So the first thing you want to do, since you have to do 6 diagrams, I'm going to take this diagram and I'm going to copy it 6 times. So I'm just going to zoom out. I'm going to spread these copies out reasonably. So I'm going to just choose the regular copy command. And I'm going to spread them out so I can kind of look at them each separately. Once I pick my first one, I'm going to select my second one, hit copy again, and I'm going to copy from the same point using my snaps so that they're all equally spaced. That is just helpful to me to be able to visualize what's going on. And what's important to remember is that you're actually going to be taking Illustrator views of these diagrams to create your series of diagrams, but in the end you're going to have these 6 views, so you can kind of visualize what your diagrams are going to be by looking at each of these views. So now that we have those set up, probably what you want to do is think about what is your first diagram. So we're just going to walk through making one of these diagrams and then talk about what we need to have as a series. So my first diagram maybe is installing just these vertical screen components. So what I want to do is I actually want to delete out all the extra stuff here. So in this case, I'm going to delete out all these horizontals. As such, it's probably a good idea to make a copy of your file so you don't delete anything that you need later. So do this on a new file, a nice clean one where all you have in the drawing is your solar screen. So now I've deleted out all of these components. So I can talk about, in the first step maybe, is putting the vertical components into my drawing. Then maybe my second diagram is actually the horizontal component. So my second diagram, I'm going to delete these out. Okay, so now I have these, but maybe it's interesting to me to have a step sort of in between these where I'm actually showing how these horizontal pieces slide into place. So maybe I'm actually going to take these and move them so that they're coming in horizontally. So I could take the gumball and slide them out enough so that when I'm looking at it in that isometric view again, let's go back to the isometric view. Sorry, go to the isometric view. And we are looking at, I think this is southeast. Yes. So if that's my isometric view, I want to move these far enough away that you can kind of see them as separate from the diagram, right? So let's take this and let's walk this through how we could create the diagram. So once I have my series of diagrams set up, so you'll figure out what happens in each of these steps. Then for each diagram, you're going to go in and you're going to do a make 2D, and you're going to bring that into, you're either going to do your line weights in Rhino, or you're going to do your line weights in Illustrator and then bring that into Photoshop. So that's my make 2D. Come in here, again, all the things we did before, make sure you have no hidden lines, no group output. Everything should look like that. Hit OK. It'll make me my 2D drawing. I go back to my top view. That's my 2D. And what I am going to do is I'm going to take that drawing and I'm just going to quickly pull it into Illustrator. So I'm going to export, selected. So this is all the stuff that we've done before. So that's my step 2, say, of my diagrams. I'm just going to call it step 2 Illustrator. Save it as an AI document and save. Just hit OK. And then that file will be set to open it up in Illustrator. So then we can jump into Illustrator and do the next step. Okay, so now I have the file and I've opened it up in Illustrator, and then I just want to go in and do all the same steps we did to make the line weights look good here. I'm going to make it bigger so I can see it. And then once I have it bigger, I'm going to do, first I'm going to take everything down to 0.25, and I'm going to change all of my line weights to black. Right, and then you want to come in, you want to clean your lines up. And with diagrams, it's really important to have a very, very clear set of line work. So on this one, there's some lines I can delete. Like I don't need to see those slab edges. There's some lines I can change. I don't need those edges poking through. I also want to make sure I have that heavy perimeter line. That's really important in diagramming. So I've got my nice heavy perimeter line, and that one, let's bump it up to, let's see what 3 looks like. That looks pretty good. E2's okay. So you've got all these different lines we want to go in. We want to set all our line weights, make them read well. And once we have that, then we can bring that into Photoshop. All right, so we have this nice perimeter line, and then you're going to want to spend some time on this interior. Once you have these line weights set up, though, you can use them for each of the diagrams. So I'm just going to take a pause here. We're going to jump to the end when I have everything done. So you can see here, I started to put my line weights on this box. And then just a little Illustrator tip, when you have something that's repetitive, you can select items and then copy them and move them onto other items instead of going in and changing every single line weight. So if you see what I do here, I'm going to select those 4 lines that are heavy, actually this 5th line too, and then I'm going to hit Control-C and then Control-V, and you can see they pop up again. Looks like I missed a line there, but then I can just pop them right into place. And I can actually come in here and just grab that one and bump it up to what I want it to be. And I can keep doing that down the row if I think that is easier than redoing the line, especially with some of these ones where you have to break the line. So if I just kind of copy it and paste that in place, and just make sure it snaps to all those little pieces, then I can proceed and go through all of these a lot faster. Sometimes it's easier just to grab them individually and copy them down, or sometimes you can group them. Okay, so now you can see I've gone through and I've done all of my line weights on these layers, and I think everything is looking nice and tidy. One thing I would encourage you to do is really concentrate on your line weights for this assignment. The diagrams are really supposed to be clean, well line weighted images that allow you to understand the project very clearly. So spend the time on the front end doing these line weights, and it will pay off when you do everything else. Okay, so now we're going to save this and we're going to bring it into Photoshop. Okay, so once we have our file made in Illustrator, we want to open it up in Photoshop. And one of the things that happens when I open up in Photoshop is I look at this diagram and I realize if I look back at my Rhino, the second diagram is very similar to the first. So I can actually use the line weight I created here for the first diagram as well if I just delete out these rails. So we'll look at how we can do that. But it's important to think about how you can be most efficient with your time, and some of the stuff may be repetitive, and you can find some sneaky ways to not have to actually do 6 different Illustrator files. All right, so let's pop back into Photoshop. So I set this up here so that I have my lines here on this layer, and then I've got a white background layer so I can see my line work. So I set that up just like we did last time, and then here I've highlighted my lines in blue. So I'll show you how I did that, but just so you can see we're looking at sort of a color composition here. Remember, picking your colors are really important, and you want to be thoughtful about them. Maybe you're choosing one color and you're just doing a gradient of those colors, or maybe you're choosing 2 or 3 complementary colors. That's where you use that Adobe color picker. But let's look at how we can do those blue lines. I'll just make a new layer here. So we'll make a new layer, we'll call it blue, and we're going to go in and we're going to highlight these horizontal pieces. Now there's 2 ways to use colors here. I could come in and I could use the same color. I'm just going to take a darker version of this. I could use the same color on all of my edges. So you can see here, if my line weights are good, make sure I'm on the blue layer, I should be able to just dump color in using the paint bucket. And I just click into the white space and it fills it right up. Okay. The other thing I could do is I could use multiple colors to give this a more 3-dimensional look. So we'll take that blue and we'll put it on one side. And then what we can do is we can go to the color picker, and then we can go, if we just move horizontally, we'll get lighter tones of the exact same color. So if I click here, you can see that's slightly lighter. I could have even gone a little bit lighter. Let me go a little bit lighter so we get a little bit more contrast. There we go. And then you can see here, we could also go darker if we go down vertically. So maybe for the short end, we do a dark blue. Right, so that makes them read a little bit more 3-dimensional, but they still read as blue elements. So neither is right or wrong, it's just different techniques. I personally like when you add a little bit of 3-dimensionality and you work within that color range, I think it can look really quite nice. So now we have these pieces highlighted and we want to show them moving over into this model. So what we can do here is, if we wanted to, if we were really good draftspeople, we could draw an arrow. So I could use the lasso tool and I could draw an arrow. Let me zoom better into this. We'll do it over here. And I could click, if I hold down Shift, it'll hold everything on straight lines and 45s. So I could do that and I could create a pretty nice arrow. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to make a new layer called arrows before I fill anything in. But yeah, that looks good. Maybe I use that same blue that I'm using. If I want to match a color, I want to go back to the color I started with. So if I want to match that blue, I can go to the color picker and then use this little dropper and it'll pick that exact same color. So I have my arrow here. I could fill that, again, using the paint bucket or the fill tool, but it's like not quite right. So that's one way to make an arrow. The other way you can make an arrow is you can use the shape tool. So if you go over here to the side, there's the line tool command. So one of these should be popped up. It's probably rectangle or the shape as a default. So you go to the line tool. The line tool has an option, if you go to this little gear, to actually put arrowheads on the start or the end. So if I do this, if I draw a line, then I get a little arrowhead at the end of the line, which is fine, but that arrow's a little pipsqueaky. You know, it's not really a very strong, good architectural arrow. And if I go back to the assignment, there are a bunch of very nice arrows. The other thing we could do is we could actually make a custom shape. So if you go here and you click on this like custom shape tool, you can see here there's different shapes. If you go to this arrow here, there's a couple defaults that come up: wild animals, boats, and then there's a folder here I have. It's called Arrow Abundance, and it is a bunch of different arrows. Now you don't have that, but what I have done is I put Arrow Abundance on Canvas. So if you go to Canvas, you can see it's here in week 13, Arrow Abundance, and you can download that file. And then all you have to do is go into the shape, into this little gear. We get into the shape and into the little gear within the shape, and you can import shapes. So if you hit import shapes, then you can go wherever you save it. I saved it to the desktop. Click on it, click load, and it'll load the arrows for you. So what's great about this one is it's actually got, the reason why I gave it to you, is that it has a ton of different arrows that are far more architectural. And once you use them, you can start to edit them. So for example, I like these arrows. I like some of these nice arrows. Let's just grab a basic one that looks like one we were trying to draw. And look at that. If you hold down the shift key, it stays nice and regular, right? Let's look at some of these other ones. So again, that's just in the custom shape tool. Let's look at maybe one of these where it's a solid. Solid can be nice. And you can see right now it's not filling, but if you look over here on the shape property, if I filled it with, say, that blue, and then I change the stroke to be that same blue, that would start to look nice. I can also change the size of that stroke. Right now it's really thick. If I change it, it'll thin that line out and it'll read a little bit better. And then once I have these, I can also manipulate them. So it's just going to keep dropping those in there. So you can use that shape tool to do a bunch of different things. So once we find an arrow that we like, let's say we want to use this arrow, you can see up here it is 113. So I'm just going to delete the rest of these arrows so I'm not confused. And I'm going to delete the arrow I made because it was ugly. And I'm going to take this arrow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the layer. Once I have it and I like it, I can right click, and what I can do is I can rasterize it. So right now it's a shape and it's kind of endlessly manipulatable, but I want it to just go back to being an object. So if I rasterize the layer, it turns it into a layer I can work with. So here then I can call that arrow. And now I can kind of do whatever I want with it. So I have it here. I want to show these arrows going this way. So right now it's got a kind of short tail. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take the marquee tool up here and I'm going to do a little box around the back of the tail. And I'm going to hit Control T. And I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to stretch that tail to be a little bit longer. Then I hit double click inside, Control D to deselect. So now it starts to look a little bit more like I want it to be. And then, if I'm just doing something left, right, up, down, I can just use that. I can use the Control T and I can rotate it around. But what I really want to do is I want to show it more in orthographic. So what I can do also is I can use the distort tool that we were using last time. Go to transform, distort, then I can start making it look a little more three-dimensional, right? Like it's going where I want these to go. So it's like a little orthographic arrow now. And There's a couple of other things I can do. Maybe I actually want it to have a line around the outside. So if I do, I can select it. And I would just, in this case, I'm just going to select it with my magic wand. Once I do that, see I get this dashed line around the edge. Then I can go here to edit, to stroke. And this again is just like Illustrator. I can add a line around the outside. So maybe add a black line around the perimeter. Yeah, okay. See how that looks? It's probably a little thin, right? Maybe we try that again. See what happens if we do 10. Let's say it's in the center. There we go. That starts to look good. So now you've got a little bit of that. Maybe you want it to be a little bit three-dimensional. One thing we can do is we can give it a little bit of depth. We can create a new layer. And I'm going to call it arrow depth. If I spell it right. And then we could put that underneath the arrow, and what we could do is we could kind of move that second arrow out from underneath the first one. Oh, we made an error, but we didn't copy it. Let's just do this. We'll duplicate this layer, which is what I meant to do. Now watch, we can move it. If we move it underneath, we could come in and we could actually make it, we can use those adjustment layers we were using last time. Maybe hue and saturation, we can make it solid black. And then maybe we can take that opacity down. That's making it hue and saturation opacity. Let's take that whole layer down a little bit. There we go. And then maybe we can kind of move it so it's got like a little bit of depth and almost a little shadow. So see how it starts to look three-dimensional? Right, so you can start to do different things here to play with these to make it look like these lines are going over to here, right? Now, if I wanted to do the same, use some of these same colors and do the same thing for my first step, I could just save this, delete some of these layers, and work back and add it onto the sheet. So that is arrows, that's lines. So there's lots of different arrow shapes you can make. And if you use that, again, if you use that custom arrow tool under shape, you can really find everything that you need. And once you rasterize it, you can change it, put it in the orientation that you like. You can start putting people in. You can put people in the same way we put people in the last model. And that should give you what you need. So let's say we wanted to use this file to create the first file. What we could do is we could go in here. We would save this. And obviously I haven't been saving. So step 2, Photoshop. And we would want to make sure we're saving this. I didn't do that right. We want to save it as a Photoshop file, not a Photoshop PDF, a PSD. So step 2, Photoshop. And then we're good there. And then what we can also do is we can do a save as and save it as step 1, Photoshop. And once we do that, we could come in and we can keep the colors that we have, but we could come in and we could clean up these line weights. So I'm just going to turn these layers off. And I want to delete just these lines. So I would use the lasso and I could just draw a box around the lines. Here. I can hit delete and those lines go away. And then I can come back here and start to turn these things on. And, you know, maybe I want to keep my arrow so I can use the same kind of arrow. I can throw that layer away, that's a throwaway. So I'm going to keep those blues. But now I'm going to do the same thing, blue. We're going to call this layer blue vertical. And when we do that, you can just come in and keep that at normal. I'm going to come in and do the same thing I did on the other lines, but we're going to do that with the verticals. So again, I want to use this blue. So I'm going to take the paint bucket and I'm going to click on this. This comes up, select that, that's the blue I want. And then I can just kind of come in here. So my first step is to put in all these vertical louvers. And then let's say I want to do the same thing I did on the other one. I want to pick a nice light. I'm going to use, as much as you can, use the exact same color. So I'm going to pick this light blue that I already have. Put that here, on the top. Oop. This is fun. Okay, so fast forwarding to the end, I've got now all three colors on all of these drawings, and I noticed something when I was filling in my lines is that I missed a line here in Illustrator, but that's okay because I can just come in here in Photoshop and go to the lines layer, and I can just erase that little section of line that should have been deleted. So I can just go into the eraser, and I can come in, and if I did that, my eraser was gigantic. So you want to look up here. If your pens are too big, you want to change your brush size. So you can make them smaller. In that case, still pretty big. If you hit the caps lock, you can actually see the brush size here. So we make that even smaller. So you can do this with all the different tools. So there. So now I need to make that even a little bit smaller. Sometimes you have to zoom in really far and just make your brush really tiny so you can be precise. But so I can go in here and I can erase these lines that were not right. And then I can come in with my paintbrush instead of my paint bucket. And so the paintbrush works the same way. I can just make a little brush that's really tiny. And I can come in and I can color that blue here. And if I want to fix those, I can actually, when I'm on the paintbrush, I can hit Alt and it'll make a little eyedropper come up, and then I can fill in that side over there. So eyedropper here, and it changes to the dark paint. And then I come back out and it's like nothing ever happened. Okay? So now I've got my two colors in here. Now I can get rid of my blue lines. I would use that lasso tool again just to delete these. Make sure I'm on the right layer. On blue, delete those. And then I have this arrow here. Now, if I want these arrows to move together, I can highlight all of them over here. And then I can go up to the top right to these three lines, and I can do link layers. And if I do this, watch what happens when I try to move them. It moves both layers together. So they retain their individual layer qualities, but they move as a group. So if I wanted to transform and rotate them, I can rotate it. It maybe doesn't work that well with this command, but I can kind of rotate it around. Looks like the little mini arrow there from another time. Where that arrow is. It's that layer there. Just delete that. There we go. So I can move that arrow around. In this case, though, I don't think I need an arrow for this diagram, so I'm actually just going to take these and delete that whole layer, make them go away. So now I have one diagram and I have the second. So let's just save these and put them into Illustrator or InDesign so you can see how that would look. So let's save this. So we save it as a Photoshop file in case we need to come back and change stuff. And then let's save a copy of it as a JPEG. Okay. And then we also need to save the other one. So let's open step 2, Photoshop, which is still here. So let's save that. Save a copy of that as a JPEG as well. And then we'll open both of these in Illustrator and we can talk about how we laid those out. Okay, so then the next step is to go into InDesign and lay your models out. So we're going to add another page to our presentation. So I'm just going to right click here and I'm going to duplicate the spread. So we're on a new sheet and I'm just going to, in this case, I'm going to title it Diagrams. Right? And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to make a couple of frames. I'm going to make one frame and I'm going to actually copy it 6 times. So I'm just selecting them and I'm holding Alt. That's copying them. And we're just going to keep them like this for now. And then I'm going to place my first step diagram in here. So place step 1. Then I'm going to go File, Place, step 2. And then let's just kind of fit these. So we'll do fit content proportionally to start out with. And these are looking good together. So if we go to we go to view and we go to preview mode, you can see, look how nice they are. So if we imagine that we had 6 of these, that were all same size, same orientation, all lined up nicely on a sheet, that will look really nice. One thing to think about as you're laying them out on the sheet is you want to make sure everything stays the same size. So it helps if you are laying them out to use the guides. So we've laid them out here and we've got the grid, but if you go up to the rulers and you pull down on the rulers, it'll bring this extra line here that you can use to line things up. So in this case, went a little low, let me grab that again. Slide it up here, so I'm grabbing the top corner of that, and I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom corner. So let's imagine, even though these are all the same, let's imagine for a second that this model came in a little bit bigger, right? That's fine, no big deal. All we have to do is make sure that these line up. So I'm going to take this one, I'm going to slide it over till I get that box down, and then I'm going to make the frame smaller and hold Shift and Control and resize the frame in my image until I get them to line up. So it's a little bit of just take your time. And you get it to line up in the bottom, you got to do it on the top again a little bit. And you just want to get it so they're sized and they look good together. The other thing you want to make sure is things are lined up vertically. So you can do the same thing here, especially because you have these nice lines. So same idea if this was over here. You would want to come in and line that up nice and vertical. And then maybe you also have one here. So you're making sure all of these elements line up. And ideally, you have the same amount of space between each of them as well. So you want to look at all of those different elements. And then if you have a lot of extra, so here these two are not lined up vertically yet. So slide this one over so it lines up. Slide this one over. Slide the frame over so it lines up. If you like how they all are lined up and maybe you need a little bit more, you want to make them a little bigger, you can select all of them, all 4 frames, and then hit Control G to group them. And then if you hold down Shift and Control, you can make them larger as a group. Right? You're going to want to center them in the sheet, and then you're going to want to come in, you're going to want to add some text and explain each of these. So say you came in, this is where you want to look at your composition. Maybe you come up with a nice lettering system that's a little bit different. So you've got some kind of, or numbering system is what I meant. And maybe that is a different color. You can make that like a gray, and then you can make add some text next to it. You want to simplify your explanations. So add vertical louvers at 2-foot spacing, or whatever your node is. Pick a good font. Again, typically if you're going to use a font, maybe you have a primary font and then you have a secondary, you have a primary font for your text, and then you maybe have a secondary like accent font. And that's what you use for something like this. Maybe this number is really big. Visually it's super big. And it kind of sits in the corner, and then your text is here. You know, play with different ways you can lay stuff out. And then, again, I always like to do the preview mode and see how everything actually looks without all the stuff around it that's a little clunky. You know, maybe they do that. Maybe it's even bigger. You don't want to overpower your diagram. You want this balance and hierarchy, but, you know, there's something to be said for something like that. Maybe that font is a little weird. You could change the font after you look at it. Change to something a little bit more. Well, Bauhaus just went away on me. But there you go. That one's pretty ugly. But you can just kind of look through and see what's out there. Different fonts might look better depending on what you're doing. And then figure out where you want to put your text relative to it. So like here, I could put it kind of lined up below. And then we figure out where we want that relative to. Okay. And then once we get that figured out, we can go back to this mode, and then we can kind of copy it. Again, it wants the same relationship that was moving. If we hit Alt, hold down Shift, it'll copy it horizontally. Right? And then you can select all of them, shift them vertically. And again, you want to check all your spacing to make sure everything's lined up the way you want it. But, you know, you can renumber them. And then change all the text, and then you have a nice series of diagrams. So you can see when you put them on the sheet like this, the things that become really important. The balance of your text, like I look at this right now, I think that the numbers are too big. So I could make them smaller, I could make them lighter. a number of different things I can do to kind of take them down, maybe a little bit of both of those. Maybe that's a nicer balance, right? But you can see the line weights are important, the color is important, it's simple, it's clean. The arrows, the size of the arrows, the cleanliness of them, a little bit of subtlety, right? So refer to all those examples that we looked at in class, and I think you can create a really beautiful set of diagrams for your project, right? I look forward to seeing what you all put together.